Imagine a quiet morning at a small house in Hayward, California. The sun is up, the street is calm, and an old man opens his door because someone says they bumped his car. He steps outside, a little confused, a little worried. In the next seconds, hands grab his wrists. A voice orders him to turn around, and the old man is suddenly in handcuffs. He does not know it yet, but the story that follows reaches back almost 50 years. It stretches from a youth club in Germany to the wooded hills near Stanford University, and it begins to close the door on two murders that haunted families, police, and a community for decades. The morning starts with a trick. An undercover officer approaches the front door and apologizes for a small crash. He says he accidentally hit a car in the driveway and asks if they should exchange insurance information. The homeowner is 74 years old. His name is John Arthur Getreu. He is polite, a bit embarrassed, and he steps outside to look. It takes only moments. Deputies tell him to face the vehicle, place his hands behind his back, and they pat him down. He is guided to the front seat of a police car. He asks about his dog. They say they will take care of the dog. The door closes. The house is still, the street is still, but a long, frozen story begins to move again. He has not been told why he is under arrest, but inside the car, he compliments the deputies on the trick. "Good line for getting me out of the house," he says, with a strange, nervous smile. It sounds almost like he respects the craft. He does not yet know how long the craft of investigators has been shaping this morning. For months, far from his front door, cold case detectives in Santa Clara County had been working a case from the 1970s. They had dusted off old reports, lifted DNA profiles from old evidence, and compared that DNA to information in public genealogy databases. It was a patient kind of work. It was quiet work. It was the opposite of a loud siren or a chase, but it pointed to a name. It pointed to this house. It pointed to this man. When they bring him into the station, they sit him down. A sergeant introduces himself and begins with easy questions. "What is your full name? Have you ever served in the military? Have you ever been arrested?" The answers come calmly. John says he was born in Newark, Ohio. He moved around a lot because his father had a long military career. He lived in West Germany as a teenager. He says he has never been arrested in the United States. Then the sergeant asks about something in Germany. There is a pause. John clears his throat. He says he was arrested there long ago. He says he was accused of murder. It is a hard turn in the interview. The room does not change, but the feeling changes. The sergeant asks for details. John says the victim was the daughter of a chaplain, a 15-year-old girl named Margaret Williams. It was 1963. They met near a youth club. The next day, her body was found on a field near the club. She had been assaulted and strangled. In Germany, the case went to trial. John was found guilty and sent to a juvenile prison. Because of his age at the time, he served about 2/3 of a 10-year sentence. After that, he was released and sent back to the United States. His father picked him up at an airbase. He says he never heard about the case again. For years, this part of his life was just a shadow in his past. The sergeant listens and asks more questions. He moves the conversation forward to California. He asks about Stanford, about the hills west of campus, about places a scout leader might hike. John says he was a scout leader. He hiked many trails with boys. He mentions Half Moon Bay. He says he does not recall the Page Mill Road area. He says he was not in those hills. The sergeant then shows a photo of a young woman. Her face is open and kind. She is smiling in a way that belongs to the early 1970s. The sergeant says she was murdered. He asks if John recognizes her. John says no, He makes a small, uncomfortable joke about her being pretty. He tries to guess that she might have been a college student. The sergeant never said that. The detail slips out like a thread. The young woman in the photo is named Leslie Perlov. In 1973, she was 21 and worked as a law clerk. She drove a 1972 orange Chevrolet Nova. One day, she parked near a gate by Old Page Mill Road to go for a walk. She never came home. Her car was found alone. Later, her body was found in the Stanford Dish area, a hilly open space of trails and grass. A floral scarf was knotted tight around her neck. She had been strangled. Under her fingernails were traces of DNA that had waited for decades to be read. When modern methods developed, when genealogical databases grew, and when detectives reached for a new set of tools, those traces gave up a name. They did not give up a confession. They gave up a name. The sergeant probes carefully. He asks about DNA. He asks how DNA moves from one person to another. John says a few things. Semen, the mouth. He says those are the only two he knows. He says technology is getting good and catching people every day. He tries to sound relaxed, but his answers make the room feel smaller and warmer. The sergeant asks, "What if your DNA is on this young woman? How could it be there?" John says he has no idea. He shakes his head. He says he was not involved. The more he denies, the more another detail slides out. He speaks about these two persons, about the one up on the hill. The sergeant has not said there are two victims in those hills, but there were. A year after Leslie disappeared, in 1974, another young woman vanished near Stanford. Her name was Janet Taylor. She was 21. Her body was found along Sand Hill Road, in the same broader area of trails and hills and open land. She had been assaulted and strangled. The cases were widely known at the time, the kind of cases that leave a mark on a place. They lived for decades in the folders and in the minds of families who would never stop wondering. They lived on in the minds of the officers who worked the first searches and the early interviews. They lived on as a whisper in Stanford stories about not walking alone, about staying safe. For a long time, these cases seemed frozen in that older world, before the internet, before cell phones, before any idea that your family tree online might someday connect to police work. Now the interview is not about the past in Germany, or the scout leader days, or whether anyone bumped a car. It is about a set of facts that sit solid on the table. Leslie's DNA evidence under her fingernails. Later, DNA evidence on a piece of clothing from Janet. The specific places bodies were found. The general area where John worked at the time, near Stanford, as a security guard. He says again and again that he does not recognize faces. He was not in those hills. He never hurt anyone. The sergeant listens. Then another investigator enters the room. The style shifts. The tone gets firmer. The second investigator says they are not trying to find out who did it. They are trying to find out why he did it. To understand the power of that moment, you have to understand what DNA means in a case like this. In the 1970s, DNA profiling did not exist in the way it does now. But investigators saved evidence. They saved clothing. They saved scrapings from under fingernails. They saved what they could tag and bag and store, waiting for science to catch up. Later, forensic analysts built a DNA profile from what was saved. That profile could be compared to a government database if a suspect had a record. But if the suspect did not, the trail went cold again. Then, in the 2010s, another path opened. People used public websites to explore their family trees. They uploaded their DNA to find relatives or learn about their ancestry. Detectives, with legal permission and careful steps, could use those websites too. They were not downloading the whole service. They were looking for a match to a small set of markers. When a distant match appeared, say a second cousin or a third cousin, the real work began. It was the work of building out a family tree, of seeing lines of cousins, of following marriages and births and migrations, of looking for a person with the right age, the right place, the right life details to fit the facts of the case. It is like solving a maze by starting near the center and tracing back to the start. Step by step, that maze led to the house in Hayward, to the front door, to the quiet man and his dog. Back in the interview room, the pressure is steady. The second investigator says the type of DNA and where it is on the victim leaves no other explanation. He says, "We know you committed this crime." He says, "You must have known this day would come." John gives a half shrug and a tight smile. He says he knew it would. And then he says, "Why did it take so long?" It is a small sentence, but it sounds like the kind of sentence that slips out when a person is tired of waiting for a knock. The investigators try for a confession. They try to open a door by offering a reason, anger, impulse, confusion, anything. They ask him to explain the why, if not the what. They ask about fantasies. They ask about whether he ever thought of harm. He keeps saying no. He keeps saying he has nothing more to say. He mentions two girls again, the one on the hill and another. When they press him on why he says two, he says he must have misunderstood. He says he does not read newspapers. He does not remember the details. He says, "If the photo you showed me is that girl, then it is not the other one." It is an odd way to deny knowing anyone. It is as if he is telling the story and not telling the story at the same time. The interview reaches its limit. The investigators finally lay it out. They say, "In Germany, a girl ended up dead, and you say you were not there. In California, years later, another girl ended up dead, and you say you were not there, yet your DNA is there. What are the chances? What would you do if you were us?" He says there is a brick wall. He says there is nothing more to say. Then he asks for a lawyer. The interview ends. The camera keeps recording a quiet room, a chair, a table, a door that will open again, with a deputy saying it is time to go. The legal process turns. It is not fast and it is not simple, but it moves. The arrest turns into charges. The charges turn into hearings. The hearings turn into a trial. In one case, a jury listens to weeks of evidence and arguments. They look at photos. They listen to experts explain the chain of custody. They listen to DNA specialists explain what a match means, what the probabilities are, and how many steps it took to arrive at a name. They listen to the defense argue about contamination, about memory, about the weight of the past. They weigh it all. In another case, there is a plea. The man at the center gives an answer that is not no. He says guilty. The judge speaks about years and life sentences and what it means to live the rest of your days in a cell. The words feel heavy and formal because they are heavy and formal. The families of Leslie and Janet are present. Their names are spoken in a court. Their lives are honored. And the long waiting of their loved ones finds a kind of ending. Not a complete ending, because grief does not end, but a closing of a chapter that was open for too long. There is another part of the story that matters here, and it is about masks and roles. On the surface, John Arthur Getreu lived a life that seemed ordinary, even helpful. He was a husband and a father. He had a job as a security guard. He volunteered as a scout leader. These are not the marks of a monster in a movie. They are the marks of a neighbor, the guy who waves when you take out the trash, the person you might trust with your kids on a hike. That is why these cases cut so deep. They remind us that evil can hide in plain sight, that the surface is not the whole story, and that kindness can be a costume when someone needs to stand close to the people they want to harm. It is not fair, and it is not the way we want to see the world, but it is part of the truth that true crime forces us to face. There is also the question of time, and time is its own character in this story. Time is the reason the evidence grew old. Time is the reason witnesses forgot small details like the color of a car or the exact bend of a road. Time is the reason families struggled to hold on to hope. But time is also the reason science learned new ways to read what was left behind. Time gave the world a way to extract DNA from an old scarf, from the edge of a nail, from the torn part of underwear that sat in a sealed bag for decades. Time allowed a small group of committed detectives to try again, and then again, until the paths lined up. In a strange twist, the longer the pause, the sharper the story became when it finally moved. When detectives use genealogy to find a suspect, it brings up hard questions. How do we protect privacy while we seek justice? How do we build rules so that powerful tools are used carefully and fairly? These questions matter, and in many places, new policies and court rulings have grown alongside the techniques. But for the families of Leslie and Janet, the debate is not abstract. It is personal. They watched detectives show up year after year with no news or just a small update. They set extra plates at tables on holidays and looked at a chair that stayed empty. They saved letters and school photos and old birthday cards. For them, a match in a database is not a headline. It is a light turning on in a dark hallway. It is the sound of a name spoken in a way that finally fits the facts. It is a chance to say, at last, we know what happened, and we can stop searching for that part of the answer. The undercover trick with the car might sound simple, even silly, but it fit the man they were arresting. He kept to routines. He looked like someone who would step out to check a dent and talk about insurance. Getting him outside safely protected the officers and avoided a scene. It also showed something about the way detectives think. They look for pressure points that do not have to be violent or dramatic. They look for ways to keep people and animals safe. They look for ways to make a complicated task calm. In this case, they cared about the dog too. It is a small detail, but it says a lot. During the interview, there are moments that stick with you. There is the instant when John guesses that the woman in the photo was a college student, even though the sergeant did not say that. There is the odd way he keeps referring to two girls in the hills before anyone else has. There is the half smile and the comment about taking so long. These are not smoking guns on their own. People say strange things when they are nervous. They reach for jokes when they feel the walls closing in. They mix up details. But together, these moments feel like cracks in a wall. Through those cracks, you can glimpse the shape of what is behind the wall. You can see a hint of a story that the person is trying not to say. It is important to remember that this story is not just about a man who denies and investigators who persist. It is about human lives that were short and bright. Leslie was at the start of a career in law. She was smart, driven, and kind. Friends remembered her as someone who cared about fairness and loved a good conversation. Janet had her own dreams, her own plans, her own circle of people who miss her. When you talk about cases like these, you can get lost in the puzzle. Routes driven, maps of trails, times of day, lab reports, chains of custody. But the heart of the puzzle is always the people who were lost. In the end, justice is not an idea. It is a way of standing up for those people in the only way that is left. After the convictions and the plea, After the sentences are read, the man at the center grows older in prison. The calendar turns to another September. News comes that he has died of natural causes at the age of 79. In a way, it is an ordinary ending for a person who did extraordinary harm. But even that ending has a chapter that continues. His DNA profile remains in the state database. Whenever a cold case unit pulls an old box off a shelf and sends a swab to a lab, his profile is there to compare against. If there are other unknowns, if there are other traces, the system will look for his number in the code. It is not an extra punishment. It is simply a way to keep the door open in case his name belongs in the margins of another file. It is one more tool to help another family hear an answer they have needed for years. When you look back, the whole story can be told from several starting points. You can start at a youth club in Germany in 1963, where a teenage boy meets a girl, and hours later, police find her body. You can start in Palo Alto in the early 1970s, on a road by a gate with an orange Nova waiting silently in the sun. You can start in 2018 or 2019, in a lab where a DNA profile appears and a family tree begins to grow on a computer screen. Or you can start on a regular weekday morning in Hayward, with a knock at the door and an apology about a car. However you start, you end up in the same place. A room with a camera, a table, and a man who cannot find a way to say the truth. In that room, the silence becomes part of the testimony. There is a lesson here for communities and for us as listeners. The lesson is about patience. Real investigations are not like TV shows. They do not wrap up in an hour. They do not always bring a sudden confession. They often rely on small details that seem boring. A record in a file, a sample stored under the right conditions, a notation of a time on a log sheet. They rely on people who stay on a job long after the first wave of attention has passed. They rely on new tools built by scientists who will never visit the crime scene. They rely on the courage of families who keep answering the phone when a detective calls after 20 years. These stories ask us to hold space for all that work and to respect the slow, steady force of truth. If you walk those hills near Stanford today, the paths are peaceful. Runners pass by with headphones in. Students hike with friends and talk about exams, futures, and plans. The wide dish of the radio telescope still sits in the distance like a giant white bowl against the sky. It is beautiful. It is also full of ghosts if you know where to look. But ghosts are not all that remain. There is also a sense that some promises were kept. Evidence was saved. Cases were not forgotten. People came back to try again. The hills are not only a place of loss. They are a place where voices rose again inside a courtroom and said the names of two young women. Those names were not left behind on a dusty shelf. This is a report, but it is also a story about the tension between how we appear and who we are. A neighbor can be kind and still be dangerous. A long, quiet life can still have dark rooms you never see. And a small, invisible thread, DNA, can be the one thing that connects a victim's last struggle to the person who caused it. In that way, the science is not cold at all. It is a warm hand reaching from the past, pointing with steady fingers. Here, this is what happened. Before we end, I want to ask you something. Do you think the growth of genealogy databases is worth the privacy trade-offs if it means closing cases like these? I'm curious how you feel about that balance. If stories like this kept you listening, please give this a like, drop a comment with your thoughts or theories, and subscribe for more true crime stories told in clear English. Your support helps bring more long, cold cases back into the light.